life can be hard, and it's okay as a male or as a female, as a mum or as a dad, to sit there and go, oh, I'm not doing too good. Put yourself first. And I think that's such an important thing that we can do, is just to be able to get to people and say, if you're doing okay today, awesome. That's what we want to hear. But when you are having a bad day, having a bad week, having a bad month, please don't beat yourself up.
This week, I'm joined by someone who's not just sparking conversations, he's reshaping them. As the founder of the Shaka Project, a movement created and now dedicated to changing the way we talk about mental health, particularly among men and our younger generations, Sean Phillip is here to share some invaluable insights and discuss some thought-provoking topics to get us not only thinking, but talking more, and how real success isn't measured by wealth, but by connection, compassion, and the impact we have on those we meet and choose to spend our time with.
It's really important to talk about that. We can all be that one person for somebody. We don't have to save the world, but if we can help out our close friends, our one or two people in our circle, then that's a pretty good start.
Sure. Welcome to Share.
Thank you so much, mate. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's I'm really looking forward to jumping into today's episode, hearing your insights and hearing a bit more of your story. I obviously met you and came across the project and obviously the cause and your movement at your gala ball. And I always say nothing happens by accident. So obviously I felt the authenticity that night, and I was really impressed, and that's why I came up and introduced myself. And I thought, it's a story that needs to be told, and obviously we're both very passionate about mental health and kind of moving that needle and reducing the statistics and just making our mark, I suppose, together to just help people out there that are struggling, and help people that maybe need to change their perspective on helping people as well that are struggling.
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. And thank you again for coming along to our gala in Brisbane. It was an amazing night, and I was able to meet a lot of incredible people from Brisbane and from beyond. So, and I'm a true believer in that too. Everything sort of happens for a reason. So it's always great to meet people that are making an impact. That's exactly what we're really passionate about at the Shaka. So if we can do that in many different ways and put as much content out there as we possibly can to help somebody, then we're happy. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, Sean, and start with, who was Sean before the Shaka Project?
Well, Sean was actually a personal trainer. So you probably can't get that from the shape of my body now, because it's been a few years. But so I was a personal trainer essentially from age of 18. So I got qualified straight out of school. I was working in gyms since I was 15, and I was a personal trainer for about 15 years. So throughout that sort of 15 years, I built up and owned and ran 4 gyms around Victoria. So that was my real passion. That was my career. That was everything that I loved, was getting up and training people, and fitness was my life. And it's something that has, it's still with me now, that love for fitness and that love for training. But throughout that sort of 15 years, it was absolutely everything. I was able to open up some really successful businesses and gyms around Victoria. And that was my entire being. I lived to do that. And then, I suppose halfway through, I started the Shaka Project as a bit of a side project, as a bit of a passion project. And we just mentioned everything happened for a reason. A couple of years in, COVID hit, which we all know messed up a lot of things. I look at COVID as a bit of a blessing. It sort of taught me what I was really, really passionate about. And I had to sort of come to terms with maybe I was losing my passion a little bit for that fitness game. And at the same time, I found this major passion for what I was doing with the Shaka Project too. So I was able to I suppose, make a shift. And I was able to close and sell a few of my gyms and go full time into doing this work, and it's the best thing I've ever done. It's something I'm extremely passionate about and have been for a very, very long time, and now to be able to do it as a career is something that I'm really, really grateful for.
Yeah. Talk to us about what was the spark that lit that flame for the Shaka Project.
I think it's probably something that's built over a long period of time with my own lived experience of mental health and suicidal ideation. Um, it's mental health's been something that has been in my life since I was around 12 years of age, and that is obviously, when we talk about spark, it's probably a slow burn that's been there since the age of 12. But the spark for me, I suppose, was when I first launched the Shaka Project. The idea behind it was to, I suppose, ignite the conversation with people in my really, really small community and my mates and family members. And, I had the gyms at the time, so I thought this could really help my members. And the conversation went almost international within 24, 48 hours. And the spark for me was seeing just how many people want to have this conversation, and just how many people really need those tools to have that conversation, and also how many people are out there are really, really doing it tough. And I think I probably went into this space a little bit ignorant, thinking that, I knew mental health was a thing. I knew suicide was a real issue, but going further into this, I suppose, space where we talk about suicide prevention, I was completely unaware when I first started just how much of an impact it was making. And when we first launched the Shaka, we were able to see the impact of suicide, of mental health, of depression, of PTSD, of all these different ill mental health conditions. It was something that really sparked me to think, okay, this is something that a lot of people really need, is something that they can be a part of, a community they can be a part of. It did something for me as well. It made me feel a little bit safe as well. I thought I was the only one struggling with mental health. I knew that others did, but that whole thing of why am I feeling like this? Am I going crazy? Am I losing my mind? Why can't I just feel better? Why can't I just get better? Everyone else out there is doing fine, but I'm not. I was in that mind frame pretty deep, and when we launched this, it was a real indication that I'm not alone, and that was a real spark. I just thought, hey, I want to be a part of something where I feel safe as well. I feel like I can talk about my mental health, but also I want to try and create a platform where other people can also do the same thing too. So, yeah, I suppose it's a slow burn into a big spark, but there's been many, many moments over the last sort of 6 years that have sparked just how important this is, not only to me, but to people in my life, and to everyone in our community as well.
And I could feel that on the night of the gala, and I feel like, with you kind of talking about your passion for it now. Talk to me about when you started having these conversations with your mates, your good mates, people in the gym. What was their reaction when you started having these conversations?
Yeah, look, I think it's when I started this project back in 2019, so it was pre-COVID. It was sort of at the time where myself, I was feeling pretty confident within my own mental health, within my own life. I had a beautiful family, and everything was going right, and work was great, and all these different things too were happening. And I remember, when I started the project, I remember feeling a little bit of a I suppose, imposter syndrome, because me myself, I was actually doing okay, mental health wise. But in the past, I knew that I wasn't. There was times before then where I had made attempts in my life, and there had been times where I didn't want to be here many, many times, and I went through some really, really tough times. And when I launched this, I felt really, really bad, because I felt like I was sort of imposing on that. And I quickly realized that just having these conversations with my mates and with my family members and with my members of the gym at the time was that it was probably the best time for me, because I was able to be there for them. I was in a moment where I was doing okay. I was able to have those conversations with them. And I think that if I launched it when I was going really poorly, it probably wouldn't have been a great thing, not only for me, but for anyone else too. So and that really, really taught me that, you have to put yourself first. Your mental health has to be priority. And the conversations I've had since then, since starting this project with close mates, with family members, with strangers, it's been unbelievable. It's pretty hard to describe some of the conversations I've had with people over the last 6 years, but once again, it gives you that sense of relief. It gives that sense of safety as well, that you're not the only one that's going through this, and you're not the only one that's experienced, suicide attempts, suicide ideation, suicide bereavement. I've lost people in my life to suicide, just like many other people have, and to be able to have those people in the community that you can talk to on those hard days, that's something that's really comforting.
Yeah. And I think, from the work that I've done and the retreats that I've, kind of attended, that imposter syndrome is very interesting, because you sit there and you kind of think, what have I got to say that's new? Or am I coming from a position of authenticity? I think the key thing for me that I remember, and I got to a point which was, not everyone is going to be receptive of what you say, but someone right there, right now, what you're saying, for those listening now, they're listening for a reason, and that's the person you're talking to, right? So you're never going to please everyone. You're never going to be received well by everyone, but you'll be received by the people that need you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a really, really big believer in we only just need one person. I think I was pretty obsessed probably when I was, that 16 through to 22-year-old, of having as many mates as I possibly could, having as many, relationships as I possibly could with people. And after a while, you start to realize that you don't need that. You need those people in your life that you can rely on, that they can rely on you. And when it comes to mental health, I'm very, very fortunate. I've got many people that I can call up right now and be in tears and be able to have a conversation with. And I don't sort of underestimate how lucky I am for that, because I know a lot of people don't have anyone. And I think it's really important to talk about that we can all be that one person for somebody. And it doesn't mean you have to be best friends with them. It doesn't mean you have to be someone that's with them, every day, all day. But if you can be someone for someone, then this conversation around mental health can be something that we can all get around. And that safety net, to be that safety net for someone, is a superpower that we all have that ability to be as well too. So, I think that's a super important thing to talk about, is just having that I suppose that awareness that we have to do things that are positive for us and positive for the people around us, and we don't have to save the world. But if we can help out our close friends, our one or two people in our circle, then that's a pretty good start.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've, been at a couple of men's retreats overseas, and, sitting there with 12 guys, and, within the first kind of hour or two, we're sharing probably more than what our partners, what our families, what anyone back home actually knows about us, like our really deep, dark, kind of, I suppose, shame or guilt, or how we feel. And, the question always comes up in these retreats, well, I can't have these conversations with guys back home, right? And for me, people say to me, well, how do you spark that conversation? And I think you've got to put the foot forward. I think, in a conversation, in a setting, you've got to be the one that has that courage to, kind of share your story, share how you're feeling, because, we know that at any one time there's people that are struggling, right? They may not be showing it, but by sharing, by actually having the courage to tell our story, by tell how we're feeling, really open up and kind of be vulnerable, it actually allows people to go, oh, wow, I can be vulnerable too. I can talk about my feelings, and I can kind of put my hand up and say, hey, I need help.
Yeah. Vulnerability and vulnerable it's my favorite word. It's everything. It's, showing vulnerability is the key to continuing this conversation around mental health. And when we see people that are vulnerable, it creates, not only does it create strength, but it creates action. And when you see somebody that is vulnerable, it gives you permission, or gives other people around them permission to also be vulnerable. So it's the big icebreaker. It's the it's that conversation that we have with our loved one or with a stranger that opens up some vulnerability that just opens the floodgates for people to be able to talk. And it's something that we talk about a lot whenever we go to we do workshops and retreats and stuff like that at workplaces and at schools and sporting clubs, and vulnerability is something we speak about a hell of a lot because it's something that we all have the ability to do. It's not easy, it's not something that is a life lesson that we all learn pretty early. It's something that is really, really tough, but the return on investment when you are opening up and showing vulnerability, and vulnerability comes in many, many different ways. But when you do that, it can open up so many different conversations. It can create so many conversations. It creates so much strength through the people around you. And I think it's a really incredible trait that a lot of people have. Like we talk about empathy a lot. We talk about introverts, extroverts, all these different traits a lot of people have. But I think vulnerability is that key trait that a lot of people do have, but it's really, really hard to get there, which I can understand. But those people who are naturally vulnerable, it's something that, I look at sporting clubs, and if I was a coach, I'd have that bloke that's the most vulnerable bloke in the room or in the team. He'd be my captain any day, because it shows the ability to be strong. It shows the ability that vulnerability and strength can actually coexist, and it allows other people to be better, which is exactly what you want in a team. So, I could speak about vulnerability for days. Absolutely love it.
It's as I've said on many episodes, it's a superpower. It's a superpower that once you kind of unleash it, it encourages others to then speak up, to put their hand up, to get help. And it's just such an important point, especially when it comes to men's mental health and shifting the conversation, shifting the perspective, which we've been kind of shifting as we look at the past generations. How do you see, from when you were growing up to now, how have you seen the shifting conversation around mental health?
Oh, yeah, it's a tough question, and I get asked pretty often, and I think every time I answer is different. Because I seriously think every week it's changing. If we're talking about men's mental health, unfortunately it's changing pretty rapidly. And I say unfortunately because it's hard to sort of grasp where we're at the moment when it comes to men's mental health. And what I mean by that is, and this is something that I think if you're not in the space, it might be hard to understand. So it's something that when you're in the space, you can see what's happening in the background that you don't really see, I suppose, on social media and all that sort of stuff. But when we speak about men's mental health and the progress that's made over the, let's say, 10 years, it's definitely improved. Absolutely. We're definitely having more conversations about it. But at the same time, there's more conversations, but that conversations are getting harder to be heard. And that's really, really tough. We have so many, I suppose, issues in the world right now that unfortunately involve men. And unfortunately, that's having a pretty big impact of the work that we're able to do around that men's mental health space. I'm really, really scared for our young boys. I think there's never been a worse time to be a young boy, especially here in Australia. I've got a young son. Well, if we look at I suppose what's happening in the world, we've just had, this adolescent show, which highlighted what's happening and I suppose the the issues that are happening around young boys and young men, which are completely valid. But I think it's painting a really, really tough picture for young boys. And I think it's painting a picture that these young boys have to almost prove themselves to not be a bad man or not be a bad boy growing up. And that's something, I look back 15 years ago, well, probably more than that. I keep forgetting that I'm over 30 now, but probably 20 years ago, as a young boy myself, I just remember I just had to be a young boy. And, that I was taught to not do this, not do that, be respectful, say please and thank yous, all these different things too. Obviously, we didn't have any social media. We didn't have anything like that. But I think if we're looking at young boys and men now, they're being taught that they have to grow up and prove that they are a good man. They have to prove that they're not, I suppose, a monster, which is really, really sad. And I'm saying this in a way that it's not pointing fingers at certain people or anything like that, but it's a really, really tough space for young boys and men at the moment to grow up to be, I suppose, accepted in some states of I suppose of life, and being able to accept of just who they are. I talk a lot about, whenever I do conferences, around the cultural care of both boys and girls. And what I mean by that is that, if we look at what's happening, especially in Victoria at the moment with the youth crime crisis, we look at young boys, 13, 14, 15-year-old, that are committing crimes, and we paint them as a picture of they are no good. They're no good. They're never going to be good. They're in trouble. They're this and they're that. But if we sort of peeled back the layers, and this is unfortunately what the news doesn't talk about, and this is something that we do see in the space, a lot of these young boys have grown up in homes where their parents have been abusive, where their parents are alcoholics, in jail, out of jail, where they've grown up through, severe drug addiction, have been given drugs as babies, all these horrible, horrible things that, I suppose, we always talk about environment creates the people we are, and these kids just don't know any better. And it's really, really unfortunate that we're talking about that, but we're not talking about, the reason that they became that, and the reason that they're acting the way they're acting, and what we can do about that, instead of what we're doing about what they're up to now. So it's a really, really scary time. And when we talk about that men's mental health space, I think it's a really, really tough time for everyone when it comes to this mental health conversation. We see, especially through social media, a lot of people, I suppose, using different mental health conditions and issues as a bit of a flag point to talk about things. ADHD is something that is very, very serious, and unfortunately on social media now every influencer has ADHD. I'm not too sure when that became a trend, but it has, and that's really unfortunate, because a lot of people with severe diagnosed ADHD are now suffering because of it. It's just becoming a really, really tough conversation to have, and it's probably really tough to see from the outside. But when you're looking at what's happening on the inside, when we look at men's mental health, for example, there's no commissioner for men's health in Australia, and by the looks of both parties, that there won't be in the next election, which is really unfortunate. It's just really, really tough for young boys and young men to try and get that, I suppose, that recognition of they're really, really trying to be better. But unfortunately, what's been created over a long period of time is making it very, very tough for them.
Yeah. I think when you talk about, boys growing up and the struggle there, I think overall in society, there is a complete identity crisis. People don't know a lot of the time who they are, who they should be, who they're expected to be. They completely lose. Okay, I'm a boy. I've got to show my masculinity, but then they're talking that I've got to be a little bit more feminine, and they're going into relationships kind of going, well, do I need to be the alpha male, or do I need to show my softer side? But if I show my softer side, then I'm not strong enough for my partner. Like, there's all these things that are going on. And like I say, the earth, when it comes to people's identity, to men, to women, to relationships, I think the Earth's kind of a little bit off its axis at the moment. And from a deeper perspective, we can see all the issues around the world. It's a pretty crazy world out there. And when people are dealing with mental health, when people are dealing with struggling with their identity, they're dealing with their past, their traumas, their childhood, all the things that are kind of happen throughout their life. It's a pretty crazy world. And it really is, I suppose, all we can do, what you're doing, what I'm doing, what a lot of the guys doing, this work in mental health space, in, kind of forming brotherhoods and forming kind of movements, is that we're kind of trying to lead our children and the generations coming through to be a little bit more vulnerable, but to really know that they can make mistakes, and those mistakes don't need to define themselves, right? Those mistakes are actually points of growth for them. Just like if you go through a mental health challenge, as Sean, you come out of it stronger, and, as a mental health first aid instructor, I always say that, it's not about, and I did a course yesterday, and I was saying to a gentleman, and I said, it's not about me standing up here as an instructor and being an expert. I'm here to facilitate. I'm here to kind of share my knowledge and share the program and really kind of collaborate and engage. And I learn stuff from participants every course. But I said, it's really about, just sharing that journey, and really just kind of trying to move the needle in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really scary moment I had last year. I was at a school up in New South Wales, and I was talking to some they would have been maybe year 10 students, both boys and girls, and we were talking about mental health, and we had a young man ask a question about the gender roles of mental health and suicide. And I said, look, we're here to talk about everyone's mental health, absolutely, but 75% of suicides, unfortunately, worldwide, are young boys and young men. And as I said it, and as I said that they're men, there was a young girl, or two young girls in front of me that laughed and said, "Oh well, now that isn't their fault. They're very young girls." But when I saw that scared the shit out of me, because again, I'm not blaming them. But that sort of attitude towards, it's not even towards boys and men, it's just towards other people, is obviously something that they've been taught. Again, not their fault. It's something that they've, whether it be through social media, whether it be through, influence of our older people, whatever it might be. But, that was almost a year ago now. And I think about that almost daily that really affected me, of what are we doing wrong for our next generation? And as you would have seen, at the gala, I'm very much about the next generation. I'm very much about, hey, we sort of grew up in a time where we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk about suicide prevention. Now we are talking about it. But we've got to try and make sure we're doing it right for the next generation. And I think a lot of factors go into that, including just that, I suppose, that mutual respect for everyone, depending on their race, religion, their sexuality, their gender, all those sorts of things, having that respect for everyone, and having that I suppose, that personal acknowledgement of other people. And I think that becomes vulnerability too. And I think that's something that I suppose I had to learn pretty quick as well when I started this work, is that this mental health thing is it doesn't discriminate whatsoever.
Uh,
It goes through all pillars of life, all of our different adversities throughout the world. And if we're talking about just Australia, it goes even deeper too. So I think that's a really, really tough thing about what's going on at the moment, especially with social media. But it's something that, again, us adults, is something that we really have to try and make sure that we're looking after that next generation, and molding something, I suppose, that they can go into a world where they don't have to, if they do make mistakes, that they can, I suppose, get through those mistakes and become better people. And we're not labeling people, we're not labeling kids, we're not labeling young boys or young girls as whatever we think they might be. I think that's a really dangerous thing. And we're just giving them those tools to be able to make mistakes and to be able to get through different things and be able to, I suppose, recognize those things. And it's almost like being a facilitator, isn't it? It's just giving them those tools to say, hey, this is going to be hard. You may screw up. You might get it wrong. In fact, you probably will get it wrong. But it doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a person. And being able to give them those tools to be able to get through that, and not shutting them down, I think it's really, really important.
I think also as well, when topics come up or things, and I'll give you an example. I've got an almost 16-year-old and a son that just turned 18, and going through the journey that I have, I've spoken to them very openly and honestly through that process, and probably it's gained even more strength, and probably more pace, talking even more openly and honestly to them as the journey kind of progressed. But when things, I remember sitting in the car one day with my almost 16-year-old, and this was probably maybe 3 years ago, and he said, "Oh, Dad, I just saw, 12-year-old girl just took her life because of bullying online." Right now, I think past generations, like my parents and their parents, like those kind of conversations, they just kind of move on to the next subject, right? For me, I see it as an opportunity to actually have a really good conversation, a really open and honest conversation, and a really good opportunity to remind, our kids that, hey, let's talk about this. Let's, like social media is tough, and you can get caught in that cycle on certain things. But at the end of the day, as I always say, just remember, you can always pick up the phone and ring your mum, ring your dad. I'm always here for you. There is never a problem that, you're not going to be able to solve or fix or whatever it is, right? Like if you're struggling, if you've done something wrong, if you've made a mistake, I don't care. I'd rather you ring me and say, "Hey, Dad, I've stuffed up. How can we fix it?" Rather than kind of holding that weight, keeping that kind of feeling of, we know that feeling, when we've done something wrong in life, that feeling you get in your gut, that just real anxious, you just want to vomit basically, right? And I want to move past our kids. Yes, they can have those feelings, but not hold on to those feelings and let it define them and let them. And I suppose when it comes to mental health, it's very much about, okay, you feel that way, cool, how do you recover? And over time, kind of learning to recover quicker, so, if you're not feeling great and you do some things that you enjoy, or you have a cold shower or a cold plunge, or you do some breath work or whatever you're going to do, if that helps you, next time that when you're feeling not great, you can put those things in place. You can use those tools out of your toolbox that are actually going to change your state, are going to change your state of mind, and you're going to bounce back quicker. It's not about, being completely resilient and not kind of feeling sad and not having things affect you. It's about making sure that you can recover and bounce back quicker each and every time.
Yeah, absolutely. That giving those tools is really important. I think, especially when a situation comes up, it's really important for us to peel back that situation as well and give them those tools, and being able to look at, I remember that happening up in Brisbane, And it was just, it's just heartbreaking. It just shouldn't be happening. And, I think it's really important to peel back the conversation and peel back the situation of what happens. And, we often see sometimes when things like this happen or other things, it's a lot of, blaming and pointing the finger and all these different things too. But it's so important to look at something and think, right, why did this happen? And essentially own our mistakes. What did we do wrong for this to happen? What do we do wrong as a community or as a I suppose an environment of a school or as a company or whatever it might be, and look at what we can do to make this better and make this not happen again. And I think you see this all the time. You see it all the time around Australia of that, I suppose, trying to peel back a conversation a little bit further, and trying to, except for punishing something or punishing someone, is actually peeling back and saying, right, what can we do? Because this is an issue and this is harming people. There was recently a story down from Victoria that a young kid, he stole some money from a charity, a fundraising thing, and he gambled it away. And horrible, absolutely horrible thing to do. Just dreadful. And it got huge amount of news. All this conversation around how much for awful person he is and terrible, and I don't disagree. What he did was just horrible. But we have a conversation like that, and then we turn on the footy, and there's 30 gambling ads before we can even watch the footy. And we're not talking about that. And that's just that. Those conversations are the ones that really sort of make it tougher. And I said before how that conversation is changing every week, and the media have a lot to answer for. We look at the 7 o'clock news of more domestic violence and these horrible things that are happening. And then we have shows like, Married at First Sight that are allowing people to punch walls, and they think it's great. They think it's great TV. It doesn't make sense. And they're sending the wrong message to the kids. They look at the news at 7 o'clock and say, hey, don't be violent. It's the wrong thing to do. And then they watch maths and they're like, hey, how good is this? So it's just a lot of people have a lot of things to answer for, I think, and the media's one of them. Especially this country has this really tough relationship with mental health and with suicide. And I think we need to, peel back a lot of conversations if we're going to fix it.
And I think as well is that when it comes to things in life and when it comes to, kind of TV especially, is that it's all about numbers. It's all about attracting attention, and, having a show that really highlights beautiful couples having beautiful, heartfelt conversations, being really open and honest with each other, being vulnerable and helping each other grow, right? From a society perspective isn't very interesting, but it should be.
Yeah.
I look at Maths, and it was the first series that I kind of, watched it because my brother-in-law and sister were watching it, and I'm currently staying with them. But it was interesting. I said at the end of the series, I said, Ree and Jeff, and for anyone listening that, had watched it, you'll know who Ree and Jeff were. They were people that had met before they actually kind of then, were matched. But they had this beautiful story through Maths, through the journey. They approached it the right way. They approached each other with respect, with openness. They just had this real vulnerability, and it was just beautiful to see. But that didn't get airtime.
No.
What got airtime was the I suppose the producers really just getting couples to have disagreements and conflict, and like even someone was saying how stupid it was throughout that experiment to you get in towards the end where you're going to go to final vows, and you're kind of saying, oh well, actually here's a bit of temptation. You actually were possibly matched with someone else, right? Like what are we teaching people? And then we're wondering why things in society aren't changing how we want them to change, because these shows are actually, people are buying into that. They're buying into the drama rather than having better conversations and focusing on having more open conversations with their partners and with their family and with their friends. That it's all this conflict and drama. And then we wonder why in society, like at the end of the day, I think if you've got to watch reality TV at the moment, I think reality TV is actually better than, to a certain point, what's actually really going on in some parts of the world. And, you talk about America and Trump and what's happening in the, Middle East and what's happening all around the world. You just sit there, and we talked about this before I kind of hit record on the episode today, but like reality TV, like the drama that's going on probably isn't as bad as what's actually going on with some of the leaders and governments and people that are in high positions around the world that aren't just, like people can look at someone like Donald Trump, who I think is completely toxic for the world, right? But they can sit there and go, he's amazing. Look, you can be the president, but to be the president, you've got to have all these attributes. Well, what are we teaching people?
Before we get back into the episode, from time to time you might have a burning question, a guest recommendation, a comment or some feedback, which I always appreciate. If so, I'd love to continue the conversation after this episode, so let's connect. I'm easy to find, but the best place to engage and connect is on Instagram, @TheSteveHodgson. But that's enough from me. Let's get back into the episode.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We're teaching, and again, we talk about the next generation, these young kids, jumping on social media, and the maths. We talk about maths a lot. It's my most hated fucking show on TV. But you see obviously they produce it to get people talking, and then they'll post things on their social media that they quite literally promote bullying of the people in the post. And then again, the next day we'll see a post about on something on the news around a death that's related to bullying, and it just it doesn't match up. And these young kids are jumping on social media. They're seeing adults. This is what I find funny: grown adults abusing people on social media, and these kids think, well, if the adults are doing it, then why can't I? And then when something happens, we're like, oh, these bloody kids. What's wrong with these kids? Why can't they just not bully? And then that person that's saying that, jumping on maths every night and calling this person a horrible word, or this guy this, or this girl or that. And then we're wondering why these kids are getting so many things wrong. It's really, really disturbing. And I think that sort of sums up what I said before around, this conversation, is that we're doing so much damage to our young kids. There was this ban that went through on social media. I'm not too sure if it was Australia-wide or Victoria-wide. Not Australia-wide. That hasn't come into effect yet, but it's making it harder for anyone under the age of 16 to access social media. And I think it's a pretty decent idea. I really do. But on the other hand, these young kids are being banned on social media by the people who made it dangerous. And if it's not the biggest piece of hypocrisy, I just don't know what else it is, because us adults are the ones that made it dangerous. Us adults are the ones that made it toxic. And we pushed it that far that we think, oh, okay, let's ban these kids from access. We'll still do it. We'll still continue to make it toxic. But let's ban them. Let's get them off it, because they're the issue. And it's just, it's just horrible. It's just such a horrible way to think about society, because we're pointing the finger at these kids are the ones that are doing it wrong. These kids are the ones that are making it unsafe. When in reality, we've made it what it is. We've created this society that kids are growing up thinking it's okay to do this, it's okay to abuse people, it's okay to bully, and they've got this platform called social media, back in high school, I didn't have, no one had social media obviously back in high school. So bullying was face to face, and, both are horrible, but to be able to bully someone on social media when you're not even with them, I can't imagine what these kids are going through. I cannot imagine, I was lucky enough. I didn't get a whole lot of bullying when I was growing up. I got a little bit, and it really affected me. But some of the things you see now via social media is just horrendous. And, as a society, we're blaming the kids for it.
The interesting thing is I think rather than banning, and I think the horse is bolted when it comes to social media, and I think you can bring in the bans and you can bring in the age restrictions. All of the social media already had age restrictions. The problem is it's going to put more pressure on mental health of the youth, because what it's going to do is going to put pressure on their parents as well, right? So if there's people that allow their kids to have social media, which I don't think it's going to change, but they'll allow their kids to have social media. Now, if parents crack down and the government cracks down and those kids aren't supported to be on social media, then they're outcast and then they're bullied, and they're like, oh, you're not on Facebook, you're not on TikTok, you're not on Snapchat, right? And then there's further, kind of isolation of these kids, when the kids that are actually probably being protected or, isolated from it are actually should be rewarded. But what they're going to be is they're going to be bullied, and they're going to be felt to feel like they're different, that they're, there's this FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So I think the horse is bolted. I don't know how you kind of wind that back. I think it's gone too far. And I think I just can't see, with technology and digital moving at the pace that it is, that they can even wind that back. And even I saw an interview with one of the guys on Meta when they were talking about these bans, and he said, these kids, the youth of today, the kids of today, they are smarter than our engineers. They will find out a way. You can't stop this. You just can't stop it.
You're absolutely right. The horse has well and truly bolted, and I think it's important for us adults to probably grow up a little bit and realize that. I think that's the biggest issue is the amount of schools that I've gone to, and they're like, oh, this bloody social media thing. I'm like, why don't you work with the kids? Why don't you say, right, we want you to control the school social media. We want you guys to get creative. They would love that. Make a TikTok for the school. Make sure it's appropriate, obviously. Make sure it's everything above board. But those kids would absolutely love it. I remember we used to do media back at school, back at high school. We used to make a movie with the video cameras and edit it. It was great. The world's changed. These teachers and adults need to realize that and understand that, hey, if these kids are smarter than us, they really are. They are very intelligent. And we need to utilize this social media in positive ways, and teach the kids that you can utilize in positive ways. But also, as adults, we have a massive responsibility to ensure that when they're on social media, that they're not seeing the stuff that they're seeing now. They're not. We're not promoting bullying. We're not promoting hatred, anger. And if you are one of those people, but then you're also wondering what's going on with all this bullying, what's going on with all these kids being bullied, then you probably need to look a bit inward, because it's all us that's made this issue. And I think it's really important for us to protect the kids as much as we possibly can. Although the horse has well and truly bolted on it, we can start to soften the blow as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. And I think really, like I said earlier, with a number of things, it's about not hiding from the conversations, the tough conversations. If there's things happening out there, it's about, okay, how do us as parents, teachers, leaders in the community, how do we open up those conversations, and how do we change the perspective of those conversations and change the way those conversations are going to actually have more of a positive effect, but also for our kids to know that if they are getting bullied, that, it's actually probably more around how the bully is feeling than actually, how they're, what it means to them, right? Like I always say, if you're walking down the street and someone has a go at you, right, it's actually a lot of the time we take things personally. It's got nothing to do with us. It's how they're feeling and what they're going through and what they're experiencing at that moment. And I think it's the same. There's research into it, is that bullies bully because of their own insecurities, of their own feelings and their emotions. And, sometimes it's from how they've grown up and how they've been shaped. But a lot of the time it's how they're feeling, because they're wanting to kind of distract from how they're feeling or distract from what people might think about them. They'd rather just, kind of project it onto someone else. But the damage that people are doing by bullying can be lifelong.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. You're absolutely right. And a bully is normally one that's been bullied. You're right. And we don't know the background. We don't know what's going on at home. When we look at young kids are experiencing some pretty horrible things at home these days, with whether it's separated parents, through domestic violence, through drug, alcohol addiction, all those different things too that we don't look at. All we look at is this kid's a bad kid because he's bullying, or him or her are bullying. And yeah, that's just a dangerous conversation to have, labeling these kids as a bad kid, without saying, why is this kid acting the way he is? I think that's what we really need to shift when we talk about this mental health conversation.
And it's interesting. I was talking to a lady who was dealing with a lot of, kind of troubled youths, people that had kind of had some tough journeys and, had some behavioral issues. And she was working on a retreat. And it was interesting. She said, she was at a retreat and they were going to take them camping and hiking and everything like that. And she said, it's funny, people were dropping them off and going, oh, you're really going to have a struggle with this guy, or you're really going to, struggle with her, because she's always stuck to her phone. She's, and they're coming in with these preconceived and, what their experience is. And the funny thing is a lot of the experiences in these retreats is you get them out in nature, you get them hiking, you get them doing these things. They don't have any problems with a lot of these kids.
Yeah.
But everyone in their life has basically just labeled them, defined them as, what they are. And then you wonder why they don't change.
Yep. Yeah. No. Look, this is something that we get all the time. I was having a conversation with a principal last year, and she called me wanting me to come out to the school and talk to the boys, and the conversation went, right, what can you do about these bloody boys? And I sort of just took it with a grain of salt, and I told her what we do, and she essentially just kept on going. Said, no, they're bloody useless. They're trouble. They're just absolutely useless. I don't know what you're going to be able to do with them. And she just kept going and just kept going and kept going and kept going. And I had to very, very politely say, look, I'll come out and talk. But I need to do it without you in the room, or without the teachers in the room. And I'd said it's simply because of the attitude towards these boys you've already got. And it's really, really damaging. If I look at my personal life, when I was at school, every single teacher I ever had told me that I was never going to be anything. Now, when I started my first business when I was pretty young, I went in with this attitude of, right, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to make a successful business, all that sort of stuff. And I really, really quickly realized that I wasn't actually doing it to prove them wrong. I was doing it to prove myself right. And the only reason I was doing that is because they told me for so long that I was useless, that then I believed it. I started believing like, okay, maybe I'm not going to be something. Maybe I'm not going to be able to do anything or succeed at anything or win at anything. I'm just going to be a complete failure, probably end up in prison, probably end up a drug addict, all that sort of stuff, which is all these things that a lot of people told me when I was young. And I started to believe it. And so every single time I had a win, I still couldn't believe it. I was like, okay, this is cool. I've opened my own gym, but it's not that important. It's not that cool. It could be better. Could be a bigger gym. Could be a more successful gym. Could be doing this. So I was constantly telling myself that, yeah, this is cool, but hey, there's still a chance for you to become a failure. And I put that all. This is something I speak to my therapist about a lot. I put that all back to, how I was, I suppose, treated and labeled as such a young kid. And, it's something that we need to really, really be careful of. Whenever I do keynotes at conferences, this is actually what I speak about is that compassion and that culture of compassion that we need to have for young boys and young girls, and not labeling, because we don't understand the effect that labeling has on these kids into the adult life. And to tell a kid that they're going to be useless is not something that's going to stick with them for a week or 2 weeks. It's going to stick with them until they're 31 years of age, just like it is with me at the moment. So it's it's really something that we need to look at again as adults. Us adults have a lot to answer for when it comes to these conversations. And I think it's a time for us all to take that responsibility and try and encourage those positive conversations and look at these kids and say, hey, right, you've messed up. However, look, you're probably not an A grade student at this school right now, but giving them the tools to say, but you can be, but you can do this, but you can find something that you're passionate about, and just give them that little bit of hope. As soon as we tell a kid that they're a no good kid, they're going to believe they're a no good kid. So it's something I'm really, really personally passionate about with my own personal experience, but also very passionate about just to be able to get into those schools and tell these young kids that there's going to be mistakes. It doesn't define them, that they can make a really big impact. I was with a kid actually just a few weeks ago at an event. He was probably about 16 years of age, and he was really into boxing. And I just finished the event, and he came up to me afterwards and said, I've spent a bit of time in different sort of boys' homes and juvenile detention and stuff like that. And he said, do you reckon I can do what you're doing? Like, I'd love to do this sort of stuff. I said, oh, mate, absolutely, for sure. Like there's no reason you can't do it. And he said, I brought it up to my mate after your presentation, and he said, you can't do it because you've been in prison. You can't do it because you've been in trouble. You can't do it because of this. You can't do it because of that.
You can actually do that because you've been in prison. You can actually do that because of the experiences that you've been through.
100%. Yeah. And that's the attitude we've got to change is that, especially the young kids, that, all right, you've messed up. That now means that you have to be a no-hoper. You have to be this. You have to be this. It's just that conversation is something we have to change.
Yeah, it doesn't make you less qualified. It makes you more qualified to actually speak, to have impact, to actually help change the needle in those kind of conversations.
For sure.
Yeah. Sean, I want to ask you, we've obviously mentioned the Shaka Project. For those listening, I'd love you to just kind of give a snapshot of, what is your vision with the Shaka Project? What are you currently doing? What are you doing behind the scenes? What are you doing in workshops? What's really your mission and your movement moving forward to kind of change, I suppose, this perspective, change the conversation around mental health and really make that impact as we look in changing the statistics, I suppose?
Yeah, I think a really important thing for us at the moment is getting around to as many people as we possibly can and just giving them the idea and the awareness that what they're experiencing matters, who they are matters, and that they have the power to start a conversation. And I think if we look at the whole mental health spectrum and I suppose what's happening with mental health, the biggest thing we forget is that at the end of the day, it comes down to people and people with loved ones, people with hearts, people with parents, daughters, kids, all that sort of stuff. And I think it's really important to be able to get into communities, big, small, and just have a conversation with those people. And when we look at Australia, regional Australia is really, really struggling at the moment. It has for a long period of time when it comes to mental health. The resources that they get, the support they get is bare minimum, and it's really unfortunate. So a really big goal for us is to be able to get into these places and say to the footy coach or say to the mum single mum of two that's really, really struggling and working 3 jobs, that it's okay to seek some support if you need to. That it's okay that, this is a little bit hard. It is. It's tough. Life can be hard, and it's okay as a male or as a female, as a mum or as a dad, to sit there and go, "Oh, I'm not doing too good," and put yourself first. And I think that we're obviously very much in that prevention space. And I think that's such an important thing that we can do, is just to be able to get to people, individuals, and say, if you're doing okay today, awesome. We love that. That's so good. That's what we want to hear. But tomorrow, next week, 6 months, 2 years down the track, when you are having a bad day, having a bad week, having a bad month, please don't beat yourself up. Please don't say you are useless, you're pathetic, you're one of the weak ones. Giving them that power to say, right, okay, I'm having a shitty one. I'm having a bad day. I'm having a bad week. What can I do for me? What can I do? Can I seek support? Can I speak to someone? Can I do this? Can I do that? And just giving them that power, and giving a lot of the other people tools to be able to have the discussions to their friends and family around mental health, but also changing a few I suppose, cultural understandings that lead into ill mental health here in Australia. We talk a lot about alcohol, drugs, and gambling, and especially with young boys and young men, and the effects that those things have, towards mental health. Having some positive conversations around the idea that as a 20-year-old bloke, if you want to go have a few beers, that's fine. But if you are going through some really, really tough times, if you're experiencing some really, really tough mental health, days, weeks, months, wherever it might be, and your mate is saying to you, let's go get absolutely sloshed, let's get absolutely smashed for 2 days straight, let's do some drugs, let's put some bets on, which is a very, very common thing for young boys and men, then he's probably a pretty crap mate. And it's probably something that we need to have that conversation around. And this is something we do a lot with sporting clubs is get into those young boys and young males and say, hey, what's more important? A beer, a bag, a bet, or your mate's life? And every time it's a mate's life. Absolutely. Right. Okay. So how many times, and this is, I've done this before. How many times as a young man have we encouraged our mate to have another beer because they've had a shit day? How many times have we encouraged our mate to come out and drink because they're struggling? And every single time, yep, I've done that. I've done that many, many times. Okay, what can we do better? How can we say, right, mate, let's go for a walk, come around to my place, have 2 or 3 beers, watch the footy, have a chat. So just having those really, really simplistic changes in our lives where we can look after one another, and instead of encouraging those things and encouraging more of those things, is having that awareness, I suppose, of like, right, okay, my mate's really, really struggling. 5 years ago, I would have said, let's go out, get smashed, have a good night. Now I'm going to call him and say, hey, let's go to the gym and have a chat. Let's go for a walk. Let's go grab a coffee. Let's, or even calling them and say, mate, I've noticed you're drinking way too much. Every weekend you're out. I know you're going through something. Do you think this is the best thing for you? Being that mate that calls it out, says, look, I'm worried about you. I think you're drinking too much. I think you may be doing some too much party drugs, all that sort of stuff too. And just having those positive conversations.
And the response to that, sometimes that approach to start off with may actually not be positive, but that friend probably 3 months down the track will actually say, hey, Sean, thank you, mate. That was what I needed to hear. That it didn't shift the needle straight away, but it planted a seed in my mind that I went, shit, I need to change what I'm doing here, because what I'm doing is actually putting me down a slippery slope and is not actually lifting me up. It's making me feel even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we've sort of grown up here in Australia. I know I did that as a young man. If Friday night, Saturday night, you go to the pub. You have a drink, you watch a footy and have a six pack, um, and the more beers you drank, the better bloke you were. And that was my true understanding for a long period of time. If I was spewing up by 12 o'clock, I was a legend. And that's something that the kids nowadays, 18, 20, are still living with. But unfortunately now there's a lot more drugs. There's a lot more access to drugs. There's access to different things. And again, just having those conversations around, right, you can most definitely, if you want to have a few beers, if you want to go and experiment with party drugs every now and then, I'm not going to, I go to sporting clubs all the time. And whenever I bring up alcohol, I always say, right, I'm not going to tell you guys never drink again. And they have a bit of a chuckle. They're like, yeah, good luck. But it's about just opening up a conversation and saying, right, we know that Josh over there is struggling. He's going through some really, really tough things at the moment. We also know that he's on the beers at 11 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it's time to check in. Maybe it's time to have a conversation, and putting our pride to the side a little bit and not being that sort of alpha dog and saying, nah, have another beer, mate, you'll be all right. And just saying, no, we need to look after him, because again, there's no beer, there's no bag, there's no bet that's more important than your mate's life or your life too. So that's something that's really, really important to us. But as I said before, mate, a big goal of ours is just to get to individuals, and we call it that sort of small blanket approach. Is if we went with a campaign that was nationwide, we'd be able to help a lot of people for sure. But our campaign in, I'm just trying to think of a small country town in, Cowra in New South Wales is very, 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 very different to what we do in Melbourne. Our campaign in regional Western Australia, in a town that has, 500 people, a pub and a footy club and a golf club, has to be different to a campaign that we do in Brisbane. It has to be, because people live differently. People have different access. People have different livelihoods. They have different financial status. All these different things that we have to take into account when we're doing our campaigns, when we're doing our outreach. And we don't want to go into a regional community and say, righto, guys, all you need to do is contact support services, because their support services are a 5-hour flight away. So we need to go into these towns and say, right, what can we do to make it easier for you to access these support services, whether it be financial aid, whether it be sending a support worker there once a month, whatever it is that we can do, we can do it. But it's about having that small blanket approach and just having that humane approach as well. I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love the insights there. I love the shift in perspective, and it gives people listening some real thoughts on how they can shift and kind of replace certain things. What's not working for me? What do I need to put in place? Rather than going to the pub, hey, let's go for a hike. Let's get active. Let's go to the gym. Love that. Can I ask you, Sean, through your life, obviously, as being a personal trainer through those years, to what you're doing now, like, how has success changed for you? What's your definition of success today?
Definition of success is being able to, go to my house that's got a roof and have breakfast with my daughter. That's it. That's all I find success as. And I think it took me a long time to realize what that was. When I first started my very first business, when I was 18, I was always like, success is having all the money in the world. It's having the biggest place. It's having multiple locations. It's having all these followers. It's having a big fan base, all that sort of stuff. I don't see that success whatsoever. What I do see success is having the ability to have the people that you love around you and being able to feel safe with them and having them feel safe. I don't see money as success. I don't see materialistic items as success whatsoever. I also see success as just having the ability to make an impact on one person. We look at the word influencer, and we look at these influencers on social media. I I see an influencer as somebody that calls their mate and says, "Hey, I think you've been drinking a bit too much, mate. Let's catch up and go to the gym." That is more of an influencer than some of the biggest influencers in the world. I think that is something that, again, we have to renegotiate as society, as what an influencer is. I think everybody has the ability to be an influencer, has the ability to make an impact. And I think success is measured on what makes you happiest. And what makes me happiest is being at home with my kids and having breakfast and feeding my dog, walking my dog, going to the beach, all that sort of stuff. And everything else is that's just extra, I suppose.
Yeah. And in your life, Sean, who would you say has been your greatest teacher?
Greatest teacher is probably the 25-year-old me, I think. Or just the previous 10-year me, like I've made a hell of a lot of mistakes. And I think it's so important to, when we look at our mistakes. This is actually something I was thinking about just the other day. I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember who it was, but they asked them, "Oh, do you have any regrets?" And I'm like, "Nah, regrets. The things that happened to me, what made me for who I am, and all that sort of stuff." And I think that's kind of just the answer that everyone gives when it comes to what are your regrets. But I've got so many regrets. I think it's really crazy to say that I've got no regrets, because some of the things that I've done, mistakes, have actually hurt other people. They've affected other people's lives, and I don't want that. I hate that I've negatively impacted other people's lives through my mistakes. And so, I look back at, I suppose 5 years ago, 10 years ago, at the mistakes I've made and the things that have happened throughout my life. And when I look at someone who's taught me to be a better person, it's looking back and going, right, that wasn't the person I want to be. How can I change to shift to be the better person and to be a person that I wanted to be? And I'm sure in 10 years' time, I'll look back at myself now and say, right, you could have done that better. You could have impacted a little bit better there. So let's try and improve that too. So I think we're always learning from our own mistakes, and we're always learning from our own, I suppose, wins and losses. And I think it's really important for us to take responsibility for those losses in a really positive way, and accepting those mistakes, and accepting that you stuff up every now and then, and you can do it better. And also the people around me. My daughter is my biggest inspiration. If we're going to talk about inspirations, she's what makes me get up in the morning and do all this kind of work, and inspires me so much. So, I'm very, very lucky, mate. I'm very lucky just to have a few people in my life that inspire me every day. But the passion that I've got for this kind of work inspires me too. So, that's probably a long answer to a short question.
No, that's all right. Awesome reflection. Yeah, just one last question. What's been your hardest lesson in life, and how did it change you?
Hardest lesson. Well, it probably goes into that conversation I was just having. Is when I first started my first businesses, and I had my gyms, and I had I started this project. It was probably a moment where I was working, probably 4 a.m. through to 10 p.m. 6 days a week. I was working my ass off, and I thought that this was what I need to do to be successful, and to, I suppose, give my family everything that they needed. And that's how I'm going to be a good dad. And I remember one day my daughter said to me, said, "You're always really grumpy. Why are you always so grumpy?" And my partner, her mum, our relationship was horrible, was just, on the rocks, and just, there was no relationship. It was really, really unfair. And I was a horrible partner. I was a horrible dad. And I kept saying, yeah, but I'm working hard. but I'm bringing in money, but I'm doing this, but I'm doing that. And I really quickly realized that none of that matters. If you are not looking after yourself mentally, if you're not putting and practicing your own positive mental health practices, because I was working so much, I gave up the things that were good for me, which were spending time with my kids, training, so exercising, eating well, getting plenty of sleep, looking after myself. I gave up all those things because I thought, right, those things don't matter. All I need to do is make this as successful as I possibly can for my family. And I really quickly realized that by giving up all those things, I was becoming a really bad dad, a really bad partner, and that was not good for my family whatsoever. It was horrible. It was the counterintuitive. So that was a big lesson for me, but it was a really great lesson because now I know that, when I go to the gym, it's not just for me, it's for the people that love me the most, because I know that I'm going to leave the gym and I'm going to feel just that little bit better. I'm putting in those reps for my own mental health. It's going to make me feel better. It's going to make me be a better dad, be a better partner, a better worker, a better employer, all those different things. But I must be doing these things for me to be able to be that best person too. So, yeah, I think that's probably up there. That's probably up there. Is just making sure and recognizing that you have to put your own mental health first, and it's not selfish to do so. I always say that, your mental health is more important than your kids. And whenever I say that at presentation, I've always got a few parents go, my kids are my life. And I get that. My kids are my life too. But I know that if I don't look after my mental health, my kids don't have a dad. It's as simple as that. And or they have a really bad dad. So your mental health has to be the number one priority, to be a good dad, to be a good partner, be a good employer, all those different things.
Yeah. And I think, the reason I kind of launched this podcast was to show, share perspectives and different insights from people. And that insight there, I think, is fantastic for anyone listening to this episode right now, asking them some questions, having some self-awareness, having some self-reflection around, how am I showing up for my kids today? How am I showing up for my partner? How am I showing up for my family? If you're a business owner or a leader, how am I showing up for my team? How am I showing up for the organization? How am I showing up for my clients, right? And really digging deep and, looking into that mirror and kind of really going, how am I showing up? Who am I? And not kind of being in denial and kind of going, oh, I'm this, I'm that, really answering those questions. And sometimes they're tough questions to answer, but the answers that come from that and the growth that comes from that means you do show up as a better human being and in all areas of your life. And I think that's just a great insight that you just shared there, which will help people listening to this show up better in life and, make sure that they start working through that phase of growth that is going to unlock them closer to the best version of themselves.
Yeah, 100%. I think if the world shifted from what can this person do for me to what can I do for this person, I think we'd get a much better world. I think it would be a much better place. And again, the redefining what success is, redefining what a good person is just so important. My parents were never world breakers. They didn't have the best jobs in the world. They didn't have, they never made a hell of a lot of money. We lived in a modest house, all that sort of stuff. But my God, were they there every single day? There was always food on the table. They were always at the events. They showed up. And I think there's a lot of pressure on young people these days, again, they have to be the most successful person on the planet. They have to have all this money. They have to have the big house. They have to have a flashy car. They have to have millions of followers. And it's going to take them a while to realize that none of that stuff matters. You can't be buried with it. But you can be buried with your memories of your kids growing up, of things in your love life, all that sort of thing too. So it's so important just to pull back a little bit from what's happening and just remember the most important things in your life.
Yeah, this has been an absolutely awesome conversation today, Sean. For those that are listening and kind of want to reach out to you, want to kind of know more about the Shaka Project and kind of engage and, kind of look into the movement a little bit more, what are the best ways to reach out to you and obviously, engage with the Shaka Project?
Yeah, so on our Instagram is probably our main socials stream. So the Shaka Project on Instagram, and that will take you through to our website, through to our Facebook page, all those different things too. So that's probably the main place. We put all of our content through Instagram, so that's been really powerful for us to be able to get our positive content out through there too. So yeah, feel free to get in touch, and we'd love to have a chat.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, brother. Love what you're doing. We all are kind of creating ripples, but together we can make waves, and just proud of what you're doing, what the team are doing, and the conversations and the kind of movement of the needle and the impact that you're having out there. So look forward to catching up again soon. But it's been brilliant today, and I know there's a lot of insights and reflections that you've shared that have really been quite positive for people that are listening today.
Thank you, mate. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All good. Thanks, mate.